Good evening, and welcome to Scotland 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski, and I will be reading the news bulletin of the day. Firstly, we have the Ukraine update, day 833 of a conflict. President Biden will sit down for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after they arrive in Normandy for the anniversary of the D-Day landings in France, the White House has confirmed. French President Emmanuel Macron will also host Zelensky on Friday in Paris, saying, as Russian strikes intensify on the front lines and against energy infrastructure, the two presidents will discuss the situation on the ground, the LEC palace said. The meeting is set to take place after D-Day commemorations. Zelensky will also deliver a speech in France's National Assembly. On Tuesday, state power operator Ukrenergo introduced forced electricity blackouts in several regions, including the capital, Kiev, the frontline Donetsk and Kharkiv regions, after Russian missiles and drone barrages, including a major attack over the weekend, which damaged Ukraine's energy networks and stretched its air defenses. Air raid alerts were declared in several regions of Ukraine on Tuesday night and into this morning. All of Ukraine was put under an alert after fighter jets took off inside Russia. Russian forces are focusing their main firepower on the eastern Donetsk region and northeastern Kharkiv, where they launched an offensive last month, according to Volodymyr Zelensky. The UK Ministry of Defense said the Avdiivka-Pokrovsk sector, northwest of Donetsk city, has remained the probable main effort of Russian forces over the last 72 hours. President Zelensky said he had met with senior commanders in Kiev on his return to Ukraine from visits to several European capitals, as well as Singapore and the Philippines over the last week. The Ukrainian mayor of Kharkiv, the regional capital and second most populous city of the country, said Russia launched 76 aerial attacks on the city in May, almost 3 times as many as during April. Ukrainian officials said 8 people were wounded in Russian attacks in the central Dnipropetrovsk region, and also in the eastern Kharkiv region overnight into Tuesday. The head of the sovereign Kherson region separately said Russian artillery fire killed an elderly woman in her yard in the village of Veletinsky. Shelling injured 2 people in the Sumy region, the local military administration said. Any French military instructors in Ukraine would be a legitimate target for Russian armed forces, Sergei Lavrov, Vladimir Putin's foreign minister, said. Ukraine's top commander said last week he had signed paperwork allowing French military instructors to access Ukrainian training centers soon. France's President Emmanuel Macron said last week he would not comment on rumors or decisions that could be made. He said he would elaborate on France's support during the 80th anniversary commemorations of D-Day this week. A former Ukrainian state official faced a trial for allegedly arranging to buy airplane parts at a price inflated 7-fold while in charge of arms imports, the country's anti-corruption agency has said. It concerns the time before Russia's 2022 invasion. For our next segment, we have the Israel-Gaza latest. At least 36,586 people have been killed and 83,074 wounded in Israeli attacks since the 7th of October, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Al Jazeera is reporting that an Israeli court has upheld the government's ban on it operating in Israel. Violent clashes broke out in Jerusalem during the annual Jerusalem Flag Day march, which commemorates the anniversary of Israel taking control and occupying East Jerusalem in 1967. At least 2 journalists were killed as right-wing Israeli youths marched chanting anti-Arab and anti-Islamic slogans. Israeli peace activists have been taking part in the Flower Parade, where they hand flowers to Palestinian residents as an alternative to the Flag March. Israel's prime minister visited the site where fires broke out in northern Israel earlier this week after rocket attacks launched from Lebanon. Israeli justice officials have said today that Israel is phasing out the use of a military run detention camp for Palestinians captured during the Gaza war. Human rights groups have reported that there has been abuse of inmates. In late May, whistleblowers were reported describing harrowing treatment of detainees at the camp. The claims included inmates regularly being kept shackled to hospital beds, blindfolded, and forced to wear nappies. Reports of a man having his limb amputated as a result of injuries sustained from constant handcuffing. The Israeli military said it has started operational activity in two areas of central Gaza in a possible broadening of its ground offensive. The military said Wednesday its forces were operating both above and below ground in eastern parts of Deir al-Balah and Bureij. Israel's government has increased the number of reservists the IDF is authorized to call up from 300,000 to 350,000. Israeli far-right minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said today that his party would disrupt the ruling coalition until Netanyahu discloses details of a prospective Gaza deal amid renewed truce efforts. The U.S. Embassy in Lebanon has said that it will remain closed for the rest of the day, but expects to open as normal on Thursday. This follows the early incident when a gunman opened fire in the compound. They were wounded in an exchange of fire with troops and detained. Hezbollah said it had targeted Israel's and detained. Let's say that again. The shooter was wounded in an exchange of fire with the troops and was detained. Hezbollah said it had targeted Israel's Iron Dome air defense system in Ramat Naftali with a guided missile. Moving on to our general election coverage, starting off with Labour, where Sir Keir Starmer has accused Rishi Sunak of deliberately lying when he claimed Labour's spending plans would increase taxes by £2,000, saying the Prime Minister's tactic during Tuesday night's TV debate showed he was dishonest when put under pressure. Sunak said Starmer was an unreliable politician who was pursuing power for power's sake. Both leaders committed not to raise income tax, national insurance, or VAT, or to increase borrowing, despite the warning of a £30 billion spending black hole. Sunak has announced plans to introduce compulsory national service for 18-year-olds. Punish fly tippers with points on their driving license, and introduce an annual cap on visas for migrants. Sir Keir Starmer has confirmed Labour's commitment to the nuclear weapons and his willingness to push the nuclear button. Starmer has also pledged to reduce migration. Anas Sarwar has accused the SNP of a petty attack for criticising both leaders' failure to mention Scotland's football team when asked about the Euros during the debate. Neither Starmer nor Sunak mentioned Scotland at all in their debate. In Wales, First Minister Vaughan Geffing has lost a no confidence. Geffings has lost a no confidence vote less than 12 weeks after taking office, following a series of scandals that have called into question his judgment and transparency over £200,000 in donations for his leadership campaign from a company whose owner, David Neil, was convicted of dumping waste on the Gwent levels in South Wales. The vote is non-binding and will not automatically force him to resign, but Geffings' leadership has been damaged. Plaid Cymru leader Rune ap Iorwerth said the First Minister has undermined has undermined his own office and the confidence of the people of Wales in his ability to govern. That was Plaid Cymru leader Rhun ap Iorwerth. Plaid Cymru leader Rhun ap Iorwerth. Jeremy Corbyn has submitted his nomination papers to stand as an independent in Islington North. In Islington North. Updates from the SNP, where Scotland's Deputy First Minister has said Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer must end their cynical vows of silence when it comes to the impact of Brexit on Scotland's businesses, saying it is impossible to back small business whilst backing Brexit barriers at the same time. Kate Forbes has said she is proud of the achievements of the Scottish economy, which is the UK's top destination for foreign direct investment outside London. She pointed to the supportive business policies introduced by the SNP, including abolishing or slashing business rates for 100,000 small businesses and establishing the Scottish National Investment Bank, but removing the red tape. Higher costs and worker visa blocks created by Brexit is critical to growing Scotland's exports. Responding to the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, analysis of both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer's economic plans, the SNP candidate for Inverness, Skye, and West Rossshire, Drew Hendry, said, the IFS are clear. The economic plan proposed by both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer will lead to cuts, and more cuts to core public services, underlining why it is vital to vote SNP to protect our NHS and put Scotland's interest first. He added, it's high time both Westminster parties stopped being dishonest about their plans and came clean with the public on where the axe will fall when it comes to public service cuts. Also, the First Minister attends events to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. First Minister John Swinney is representing the people of Scotland at national commemorations honouring the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Today, he is attending the main UK ceremony in Portsmouth to celebrate the work of UK and other forces of a port city from which the Allies left for the beaches of Normandy. Tomorrow, he will attend the first ever national commemoration ceremony to be held at the British War Memorial in Vers-sur-Mer in France to pay tribute to all who served in the Normandy campaign. In Scotland, a National D-Day 80th commemoration concert is being held in Edinburgh, supported by the Scottish Government. Minister for Veterans Graham Day will be in attendance. The First Minister said, Scotland owes a great debt of gratitude to all those who served during the Second World War, especially to those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Were it not for the actions of those brave men and women 80 years ago, we would not enjoy the freedoms which we now take for granted. It is important that current and future generations continue to learn of the events that took place in Normandy, so that we ensure such a conflict is never repeated. The Scottish Government is wholehearted in our commitment to supporting our armed forces, veterans, and their families in Scotland. We will never forget those who have and continue to lay down their lives in service of their country. The TUC warns Labour they must increase public sector pay or face strikes. Matt Rack, the president of the Trades Union Congress, has warned that a Labour government will risk public sector strikes if it fails to increase workers' pay, adding to the financial pressures facing Rachel Reeves if she becomes Chancellor. Mr. Rack, who is also head of a fire brigades union, urged Sir Keir Starmer not to enforce tight public sector pay settlements. Just hours after the Labour leader said his party would not meet the 35% pay rise demanded by junior doctors. The union leader's comments, 2 days before Labour leaders are meeting trade unions to agree the party's manifesto, hint at trade unions' distrust of Reeves and Starmer to keep their pre-election promises. Matt Rack said, an upcoming Labour government has to take into account the fact that people have struggled over 14 years, particularly on the back of a cost of living crisis. Something has got to be done to address that in people's pay packet. Labour's package on employment protection, previously known as the New Deal for Working People and now rebranded Labour's plan to make work pay, has been at the centre of arguments between the party and unions. Union leaders accused Labour of watering down its plans after it emerged the party planned to allow workers to sign 0-hours contracts if they wished, and wanted exceptions to its ban on fire and rehire. The SNP deputy leader says veteran services in Scotland are under threat from Westminster cuts. SNP deputy leader Keith Brown, who served with the Royal Marines, has said that neither Labour nor the Tories will stand up for the interest of Scottish veterans, as they threaten to impose over £33 billion of cuts to public services. Despite denying the further austerity cuts will be in their budgets, the IFS has said that Labour and the Tories are being dishonest with the public on the cuts they'll impose, with the IFS warning that their fiscal rulings has led to both parties avoiding the reality that they are effectively signed up to sharp spending cuts. Quote from the IFS. This week, the Resolution Foundation has also warned that whoever wins the election could be confronting a fiscal hole of £12 billion if today's uncertainties turn into bad news after the election. And if the next government wants to avoid a fresh round of austerity, that black hole would rise to over £33 billion. Keith Brown's visited the Lothian Veterans Centre this afternoon to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day, while the First Minister is representing Scotland at the ceremonies to mark the D-Day landings. Commenting, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, "We owe our veterans community in Scotland a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. But under both Labour and Tories, essential services ex-military personnel rely on are in danger of cuts. From providing purpose-built housing that fits veterans' needs to increasing access to mental health support, it's only by sending SNP MPs to Westminster that we can make sure that the needs of our veterans are not forgotten. On 4th of July, only a vote for the SNP will we be able to protect and build upon the services and support available to our veterans and build a future made in Scotland for Scotland." End quote. Brexit has caused a huge drop in sales for small and medium-sized UK clothing firms. UK exports of clothing and footwear to the EU have plummeted since Brexit, according to a new study that shows the extent to which complex regulations and red tape at the border have deterred firms from sending goods across the channel. Exports of clothing and footwear sold to EU countries have fallen from £7.4 billion in 2019 to £2.7 billion in 2023. Helping fuel an 18% slump in sales of all non-food good exports to countries covered by the EU single market, according to the consultancy Retail Economics and online marketplace TradeByte. The report said the decline meant UK brands and retailers have seen sales to the EU collapse since Brexit, despite a flourishing European e-commerce market. The only sectors to increase export sales over the same period were health and beauty, and DIY and gardening, offsetting some of the fall from clothing and footwear. Many of the worst affected were small and medium-sized businesses, which faced a larger relative burden from red tape than multinational firms. One of the report's authors, Richard Lim, head of retail economics, said some of the fall was simply down to a change in trade routes. UK firms that previously repackaged imports of goods made in Asia for sale in the EU have now reorganized their supply chains by setting up offices inside the single market to bypass border regulations. Red tape has forced many producers making apparel in the UK to move manufacturing to an EU country, at a cost to UK skills and jobs. The UK has also failed to benefit from a boom in online goods sales in the EU since 2019, the offers suggest. Almost half of journalists covering the climate crisis globally threatened over their reporting. New research has found that almost 4 out of 10 journalists covering the climate crisis and environment issues have been threatened as a result of their work, with 11% subjected to physical violence. The global survey of more than 740 reporters and editors from 102 countries found that 43% of those threatened sometimes or frequently were targeted by people engaged in illegal activities such as logging and mining. Some 30%, meanwhile, were threatened with legal action, reflecting a growing trend towards corporations and governments deploying the judicial system to muzzle free speech. A global survey by Internews's Earth Journalism Network, EJN, and Deakin University, in the first of its kind scrutiny of the challenges faced by journalists covering arguably the most pressing, if not existential, issues of our time. The Covering the Planet report includes in-depth interviews with 74 journalists from 31 countries about what help they need to do a better job reporting extreme weather, plastics pollution, water scarcity, and mining, as global heating and unchecked corporate greed pushes the planet to its limits. Majority said climate and environmental stories have more prominence relative to other subjects than a decade ago, but the volume of coverage of the climate crisis is still not commensurate with the gravity of the problem. Record breaking temperatures, storms, floods, droughts, and wildfires are striking with increasing intensity across the world, with low income communities, indigenous peoples, and people of color the most vulnerable to climate impacts. Slow onset disasters such as sea level rise, glacier melts, ocean acidification, and desertification are also driving forced migration, hunger, and other human health disasters. Despite the breadth and magnitude of the problems, 39% of journalists surveyed reported having self censored, mostly due to fear of repercussions from those undertaking illegal activities, or the government. It's not just that some reporters and editors feel compelled to exclude potentially important information from their audience. 62% reported including statements from sources who are skeptical of human caused climate change or climate science, in the misguided belief that this was required for balance. The survey also found an overwhelming need for more resources for newsrooms covering the environment and the climate crisis. 76% of those surveyed said insufficient resources limit their coverage and identified more funding for in-depth journalism, in-person training, and workshops, and more access to relevant data and subject experts as among their top priorities. Scottish Government publishes education reform legislation to create a new national qualifications body and an independent inspectorate of schools and other educational providers has been published. The Education Scotland Bill includes provisions to replace the Scottish Qualifications Authority, SQA, with a new national qualifications body, Qualifications Scotland. If passed by the Scottish Parliament, the legislation will also establish the office of His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Education in Scotland, with enhanced independence, to undertake the education inspection functions which currently sit within Education Scotland. While not part of the bill provisions, Education Scotland's role as the national education agency is also to be refocused as part of the reform process, including taking a lead on curriculum design, delivery, and improvement, which will cover the provision of resources to support high quality learning and teaching. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth said, "I am determined to drive further improvements across Scotland's schools, and the changes being set out in the bill will strengthen the national education landscape to better support pupils and teachers." The governance processes for the new national qualifications body will ensure the knowledge and experience of pupils and teachers are central to decisions taken on qualifications and assessment. Greater independence for the new inspectorate body will see the power to set the frequency and focus for inspections moving from Scottish ministers to the High Majesty's Chief Inspector. This is a significant change and will increase confidence in the independent role of inspections in assessing and identifying strengths and areas for improvement across our education system. The Scottish Government's programme of education and skills reform will drive improvement right across the education system. That's why we've taken time to engage with learners, teachers, and other professionals across the education and skills sector to ensure these changes meet the needs of future generations. End quote. That wraps us up for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscribers base and regular funding. I was Patryk Witkowski. Thank you for watching, and catch you again soon.